Hello everyone. It's so good to see you all. Hello. I'm glad that everyone's enjoying the music and is in a festive party mood. So, it's so great to see you as well. She had it stacked like 4 cartons high. Oh my gosh, the HEB guac. Yeah, it's good. I remember once someone got the 7-layer dip from there, and it's really good too. I think that's where it's from. So, anyways, so welcome to today's stream. I've been like busy for the past couple of days, so I kind of really couldn't stream until today. But I did want to sort of go over some interesting stuff. Yeah, exactly. I like their prepared food too. And it's not that bad either, right? Like in terms of pricing, like if you're gonna get some, like it is something it's something that, like, for example, like for that party, like it's something you would go for that and it wouldn't, you wouldn't be breaking the bank. Yeah. So, hello, hope everyone is having, then Kroger, but anything is better than, like out here in California, like it's like Ralph's is really expensive, Pavilions is really expensive, Stater Brothers is it's like it has like its own brands of stuff. Hi, the Kivit. I'm doing well. How about yourself? I'm doing pretty good. Just like I said, I was just busy this week, so I really didn't have much of a chance to stream or anything, plus like a whole bunch of other stuff. Yes, I am an LA person. Yes, exactly. So that comes with, its baggage. No, I'm just so for today, what I wanted to look at was I wanted us to look at trust me, I would miss LA too. Like anytime that, like, when I was doing graduate work and I had to do research and I had to leave LA, I'm like, no thank you, like, no. I'm like, I'd rather just stay at home. But no, yes, we're gonna go over first the National Democratic Revolution in the Philippines, pseudo-archaeology, like what is it, what are we talking about when we use it, and why is it bad, right? Because there are a lot of people that want to try to say, you've never been to California? That means you've never seen actually existing communism in the US then. No, at least that's, like, I wish California was as, like, Graham Hancock, right? Yeah, exactly. Like, but there are so many people, I have never been to California either, really want to visit. Oh, it's worth it. Like food and stuff isn't expensive. It's everything else, right? It's like living is expensive, right? Like living somewhere is really expensive. Insurance is expensive, blah blah blah, but like food isn't, right? Oh yeah. Like when I say LA, I also mean like this like general area from like, like not like Needles or anything, but like, kind of like west of Palm Springs, right? And then like south of Ventura County, and then like north of like Temecula, I guess. Y'all keep sending me all these Californians to Texas. I'm gonna come invade y'all. Hey, I honestly, like, there are some parts of California that, well, I should put it this way. Historically, had a very similar climate to parts of Texas. Like, if that's, like, there are some people, that they very much like a specific climate, right? Yeah, but like, I would even venture to say, like, going all the way up to, like, Santa Maria is, like, essentially, like, LA as well, because it's, like, people commute. I know people that commute from there, so like yeah, anyway, but yeah, it's like people that really like a certain climate, right? There were areas when before all of the rivers got dammed up and got all of the water sucked out of them, but there were areas that resembled places in the South, for example, are places like Texas, places like, where you actually, but it wouldn't have, it would be like Texas in the spring. Yeah, exactly. Wherever the Metrolink goes, so like Victorville West, and then Santa Maria South, and then and then Oceanside North. That's like LA to me. I live in a desert in Washington. No one believes me. I know what you mean. Like, I'll never forget though when once Central Washington, is it Central Washington State or Central Washington University, like, sent an ad for people to like apply for one of their instructor positions, and they talked about how much sun they get, and I'm like, you realize you're telling people from Southern California about sunniness? Yes, yeah. Central Washington, yeah, exactly. Austin is so much like Cali. I would agree. There's like a lot of. I just wish there was better public transport. Like the Red Line is not enough, but the air like UTA, like the people I know at UTA and people that and all of the like Mexican culture there is like makes me feel like I could be. Yeah, exactly. And they're like telling that to like people from LA, and it's like that's not a sell for us, that, right? Like, we also get a lot of sunlight, and like maybe you want to go to like northern Norway or something. I don't know, ask them. Yeah, Eastern Oregon. I've heard Eastern Oregon is beautiful outside of Walla Walla. Okay, that's nice. So that's where they have a lot of the apple orchards, right? Getting around LA is very complicated because many cities have their own. Yes, and there is a big issue with that. That is because of its history, right? Because of its racist history, right? Like how neighborhoods were destroyed to build apples and grapes and cider and wine. Yeah, exactly. It's interesting too because a lot of people don't realize that Mexico also has like a wine, multiple wine regions, I should say. But like one of them is just across the border from California, and like people never, and they have like world-class restaurants and stuff, and and it was initially started by Russian immigrants that live there. I feel so bad for people that move from Houston to Cali and now they have to adjust to drowning in humidity. Oh, from Cali. Oh, yeah, humidity is not my friend. Humidity is not. That's the reason why it's like I prefer just the Mediterranean, like as it's called, right, in the Köppen climate classification system. Like I just like even more. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, there are town. I mean, Cudahy has its own bus system, for Pete's sake, right? Whittier has its own. Even Anaheim isn't covered completely by just one system. It has two, technically. But I don't know. It's just weird. Long Beach. Oh yeah, don't even get me started about Long Beach. Don't even get me started about Long Beach. Like, you do not want me to start. Oxnard. Oh my gosh. Yes, you know exactly what's going on. So, anyway. Let me see here. Camera. Okay. I'm just trying to set up the scene so that we can watch our videos. Let me turn the music off. Okay. Let me know if you can hear okay. I think.
Whenever socialist revolution is mentioned, the first images that spring to mind might be of the masses of Russian workers storming the Winter Palace, or perhaps of old photographs of Che Guevara and a small band of guerrillas. In Ireland, whenever socialist Republicans think of revolution, we often call back to heroic depictions of the GPO aflame during the 1916 Rising, or of the pikes of the United Irishmen during the 1798 Rebellion. All of these images are certainly useful points of reference for our minds to begin to sketch out an understanding of what a revolution is and what it involves. However, we often find ourselves thinking of revolutions as historical events of the bygone past, rather than as living, ongoing processes happening right now at this very moment. This video will hopefully serve as a snapshot of one of the most advanced examples of an ongoing communist-led revolution in the world today, namely the National Democratic Revolution in the Philippines. This revolution, involving hundreds of thousands of dedicated revolutionaries and progressives, within a support base of millions, is fighting to change Filipino society in a truly radical way by breaking the chains of imperialism, semi-feudalism, and bureaucratic capitalism, paving the way for future socialist society.
So one reason why I wanted to discuss this revolution or this struggle is because, sort of like Paul says, there is images of what a revolution should look like. And I think that especially in the United States, I've noticed that this is true, right? That people think that revolution, you've never heard of this? This is one of the, often this is called one of the Maoist. Hello, the Ferret King, my best pal. How are you? It's so good to see you. So glad everybody's here. So, one thing that we need to remember is that, socialism, Marxism, etc., has gone through many transformations, right? Some people understand that there was the Marxism of Marx and Engels, right? That then was taken to a new stage, right, with Lenin, with particularly his understanding of imperialism, right? And so Marxist-Leninism, one could argue, is the Marxism of the world, right, in an imperialist world, I guess, as a response to the situation of it being an imperialist world, right? Imperialist capitalism being the way in which everything is done. Now, the way how Marxist-Leninism, Maoism is different is that it takes what Mao particularly spoke about, one, the two-line struggle, right, which involves, for example, something called a phrase, from the masses to the masses. So that means that it's not the vanguard party that just, for example, like, this is often how people who do not necessarily read socialist history often think that the vanguard party is the, like, correct party, and everyone else just has to, like, eventually become like them. And that's not how that works, right? Mao talks about this, particularly when it comes, of course, to contradiction, but also when describing the fact that there is a need to include amongst the revolutionary classes, not just the working classes, but also the peasantry. And that is also an understanding of the semi-feudal and semi-colonial nature of many of the imperialized countries in the world, if not all of them. Are there still many proponents of the Second International? Well, the Second International would be Trotskyists at this point. And so there are people that identify as Trotskyists. In fact, this just came to my mind right now, but I remember that Bad Empanada, who, is neither here nor there, like it's... Oh, yeah, that's right, the fourth. Yeah, I don't know why I was confusing it with the second. No, you're right, the Ferret King. Thank you. Thank you so much for correcting that. Yes, the fourth, hence the four when you, yeah. In there, yes, exactly. The Second International, yes. That's the one... But yes, are there proponents of the Second International? Then no. I would say, however, that now that we live in now that we have lived through two stages of revisionism, right? That is to say, with the Soviet Union, right, becoming a capitalist social imperialist state, and then obviously its collapse, and then the People's Republic of China returning to the capitalist road under Deng, right? Like, for example, an NCC brought this up the other day, yesterday actually. Like, one of the reasons why social democracy became, as it were, I mean, it isn't just a cause and effect relation, right? Hi, Buffy, it's so good to see you. But communist, a lot of people will say like they're intersectional leftists. Also, the Kievit. I don't think it's necessary to. Well, the people that say that they're Marxists but not Leninists, right? Again, I don't think it's necessary to have the title, as it were, be the eternal definition of your. You know what I mean? Like the way in which, like, that's why I think that the idea of it being an evolving thing, right? In the same way how the world has changed. When do you consider someone a Marxist? Well, for one, they have to understand the basic principles of Marxism. It's it's not just understanding that there are different classes, right? But it's understanding that class struggle is the central contradiction, right, that we need to look at. Do you need the historicism and you mean the historical materialism and dialectical materialism? Yes, you do. I mean, again, those are just methods, right? Those are just methods of analysis. And I think, to me, that's where people often get caught up in these, like, oh, well, if I understand things through a materialist perspective, then that means blah, 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 right? No. Looking at it in a materialist perspective is understanding that liberal idealism, right, where people believe that, for example, that just having a debate. Oh my gosh, goodness gracious, thank you so much, the Ferret King, for getting us started, for giving little Donny Fund a gift sub. Thank you so much. Yeah, materialism goes deep. And like, one of the things is, again, looking at the fact that you cannot understand history without considering the material conditions in which it exists, right? Yes, it goes into the questions of existence itself. And another thing, too, is that it does not fall into the issues of liberal idealism by thinking that ideas themselves are what change history, as opposed to material conditions and the relationship to the superstructure that they create, and which is then used to recreate the economic base, is how history tends to work. So I was like, hello, I just wanted to be a social. I didn't know I have to relearn reality. Yeah, but see, that's the thing with liberal idealism, right? Is that like, that's why people like Vosh, for example. I'm just going to use, or in Destiny, etc. I'm just using their names just because people are going to be likely to know them. That think that it doesn't matter whether or not people understand these concepts. It's that as long as they can do the debates, right, just in and of themselves, that is praxis, and that is not praxis. In fact, that is something that Mao explicitly says is not practice. Like, debating for debate itself, allowing for right deviationists or for rightists, as Mao would say, is incorrect, right? Like, you don't debate revisionists. You don't debate fascists. That's not the point. Like, liberal idealism is the belief that through that debate you can somehow reach some kind of conclusion, right? That would be worthwhile, but there isn't, right? Like, that's the point. Like fascists do not have a materialist understanding of history. In fact, quite the opposite. They have an idealist one that they try to pass off as though it's realism, right? And in fact, the realism of Mearsheimer, for example, who blew up after the invasion of Ukraine, like if you really understand like the school of thought that was called American pragmatism, which literally if you have insomnia, I'm not even joking, just having one of their books next to you of the American pragmatist will send you off to sleep. I'm not even joking. Like literally it will cure your, well, I think that perhaps the idea of it being deterministic is, I don't know, I feel that that's putting the cart before the horse there, the Kivit. Like, I think that that's, like, I feel, I heard realist, where are they? Right? I think that, no, actually, I would argue quite the opposite, that Marx is the opposite. It's not deterministic, because it says that, because it's understanding that if material conditions were changed, then superstructural conditions would change, right? And if superstructural conditions change, then that would have some effect. Oh my gosh, thank you so much, the Ferret King, once again, for giving a tier 1 sub to DJ Chai. Thank you so much. And so I think that is... Oh my gosh, thank you so much again, the Ferret King, for gifting a tier 1 sub. Yes, truly kingly behavior. So I would argue, I would take issue with that a little bit. So anyway, as I was sort of saying, this new stage, right, that is understood, and I think, who said it? Oh, Cat. Hi, Cat. It's so good to see you. Hello, good news. After what happened before, my blood draw went well. She only had to poke me twice and got me in the arm. Sometimes it's so bad they use my hand. Oh, that's good. Well, I'm glad that went well. Let's see. I saw another comment. What's fascinating to me is to learn is there are different variations of MLM. Well, again, that's because, again, like, there is this understanding that we are now in a different stage, right? Like, there is a higher stage now, if one wants to think of it in that way, of Marxism that has to take into account, right, Mao's work as a new step to build upon, right? Like, in the same way that Mao was building up upon Lenin's understanding, right, when it came to imperialism and his innovations in that sense, so too does Maoism with its understanding of the two-line struggle from the masses to the masses of, and then if you want to go into specifics, which I think is, this is where people often confuse people that are Maoists, as it were, on the internet, right? And people who are Maoists in the sense that they understand that due to, us being particularly now in a new imperialist stage in history, where, for example, the three largest capitalist empires are to some extent already either fighting through proxy or, are already, doing other such things that are in essence war by other means. It means that something like what Mao writes, in particular in relation to imperialism, and specifically because he does name American imperialism as being the main imperialism that needs to be. It doesn't mean that all of it doesn't mean it's the only one, but the fact that it's the one, it's the imperial, it's the belly of the beast, right, as Che Guevara said it, right? And so that's one aspect too. Like, if imperialism is to be ended, it cannot be done by not having a revolution in the first world. This is why third worldism is oh my goodness gracious, thank you so much, the Ferret King, for giving Scribble Hearts a subscription. I appreciate that. Wow, we're already almost to the full sub goal for today. So third worldism, seeing it as a right deviation of that, right? That says that the quote unquote the first world is completely like there's no point in even trying to radicalize and to even any of that, right? Like essentially everybody in there is an imperialist or an imperialist running dog, right? And that is not the way in which Marxism, Leninism, Maoism, right? Understanding it as a trajectory of socialism would see that, right? Like there should be no divisions that essentially take the imperialist view of the world, flips it around, and then says, "Oh well, yeah, the empires are kind of uh, like impregnable from revolution." When you know what I mean, like that doesn't make any sense. So, I was the person who mentioned I most fainted. Yeah, no, I remember that, and I'm so glad to hear that it all went well. I'm trying to build an org here. We're out here. Yeah, exactly. Like even the org that I was the director of in Mexico. One of the things is that it was multi-tendency, and that's personally how I like it, because I think to me, if we can sync all of our what we're working for, and if we want to, all the particularities are aside, you can get a lot of things done, like strikes, like mutual aid funds, right? And that was something that we were able to do that in an imperialized country, with a network that, for example, led to workers striking and fomenting for policy, in particular to raise the minimum wage by 20%, and to also, again, working with, there is always the question of using bourgeois democracy, but again, the whole point was to help workers be able to get more remuneration for their work and also get time off and get that written in law, right? And that happened. So to have helped in any way with the protest to make sure that people were fed, that people, had access to, whatever, electricity, blah, blah, blah. That is what matters. Like, people often forget that the mutual aid thing has to be a constant thing. You have to be, and the only way to do that is to, if you want to teach whatever, blah, focus on this, in your own org, that's fine. But when we're working together, and we just focus on the things that we agree on, then that's when you're able to do things like, again, start because Guadalajara, for example, and even Mexico City, it's there. I mean, Mexico City used to be the largest city on the planet, right? It's only now recently that it's kind of like in this weird limbo where, well, if we use the official definition, it's smaller. If we use the expanded definition, it technically includes cities that aren't in it, blah, blah, blah. But to be able to have a network that can distribute, for example, something like food, right, across state lines in this immense metropolis, right, one of the largest cities in the world, and that can do that, was able to do that during a pandemic, is, I feel, one of the successes that we had, right? It was a way of bringing together our resources for what we needed in that moment. And, like, people might say, say, oh, it's not, yeah, there was no revolution, right, yet. But again, the workers still need food. Their children still need food, right? They still need all of these things, right? And so, I guess one could. So that was one of the things that, again, that org that I was director of at that time, that we organized, right, to make sure that if workers were going to go on strike for better working conditions during the pandemic, that they could do so without fear of losing income, at least not in any way that would jeopardize, right, their ability to continue striking. And making sure that the picket lines were upheld, et cetera, et cetera. by, you know, trying to make more networks, right, to work together. And so, you know, again, it might not seem like a lot, but trust me, a 20% raise for the minimum wage. Imagine if that were to be done in the United States, that would be immense. I mean, you know, it would be a huge change compared to $7 and whatever it is right now. So I know it's not a lot, and I know it's only the product of bourgeois democracy, but it's something, right? It's something to help the workers, and it didn't stop people from wanting to radicalize further, right? That would be a paradigm shift if it would work, since the impact would be so much. Yeah, precisely. I mean, in the sense that it shows that their conditions can be improved. Right, exactly. And that's one of the things, like the fact that the national minimum wage in Mexico was raised in 1 year 20%, because of work of striking workers, right, shows that if America could, if the different unions that are currently on strike were all to be striking together at the same time, they could get something like that done as well. But then that means that leftists and our orgs have to be working to support the workers. And that's something that I've always found, I don't know why. Like, I would think that in America it would be easier, but I've always found it more difficult, and I don't know why that is in the United States. I honestly don't know why.
Today we're going to take a look at this revolution's history, its theory, and its practice. But first, if you're new here, then go ahead and hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell below for socialist educational content and analysis. If you're in a position to do so, then consider tossing a couple of euro or dollar per month over on Patreon. The channel's currently moving towards releasing videos on a weekly basis, which requires getting in the help of an editor. So any contributions you make will be going directly back into the channel.
Can I define leftists? The division between whether you are right wing or left wing, the only real definition, is whether you are for capitalism or against it. If you want to abolish capitalism, you are on the left. If you want to just reform it, you're on the right. Right? It's reform or revolution, right? Like it's not the American definition. It's not the Ted Kaczynski definition, right? I would suppose I would not be left by that definition, right? I mean, well, again, that doesn't mean, however, that people who are on the left, right? At least, again, using the one, as it were. So, let me put it to you like this. The word politics comes from, I know people will think, oh, it comes from polis, right? But the word for a city in Greek refers to actually the wall that surrounds it, right? It's referencing that, the politeia, right? That's where we get the word politics. So, politics is already, even in Greek, seen as division by definition, right? That there is not, these, like, oh, I can have a left-wing policy. No, if you aren't for fundamental change in the world system that is capitalism, then, and all of its other derivative systems, right? Then you are not on the left, right? It does not mean, however, that there aren't people who, say, are more social democrats, for example, or whatever it might be, that don't have some something that they could themselves, through enhancing their understanding of what leftists want, by being. Oh, thank you so much. Adadak, I think someone's trying to do a postal scam on me? What do you mean? Adadak, that's crazy. So I think, to me, like, this is where I think that people who are more reformist, right? I think that this is where having them discuss, say, what Marxism is, what all of this stuff is, and actually coming to understand what we mean and what we want usually results in them understanding, for example, and I'm just using this as an example, that their desire for reform is something that is not enough, right? That it is not necessarily, but it does not mean, however, that you have to be cut out of the conversation. I want to make that very clear. I don't think that that's unpopular with more materialist minded, but I would say a large factor of a DJ. I would say that Althusser already discussed this in the book on ideology, where the United States being the imperialist hegemon of the entire world, like by far, the two other empires that are capitalist imperialist states that exist, one being Russia, which is the weakest of the three, and the other one being China, which is, sort of a near peer, as some people who try to confuse geopolitics and political economy sometimes try to use, is that ideology requires that the material base, that is to say, world imperialism, specifically that of the United States, has to be reproduced in the cultural superstructure. So I would say that, quite on the contrary, that isn't a contradiction, what you just said. It's not unpopular with, people that actually understand dialectical materialism and understand how ideology works, then that's a bit of a different story, because again, even Marx goes into a discussion of ideology, right? So I would say that is one of the things, is that we know that that material conditions give rise to the ideological conditions by which to continue said relations, right? Like, that is why, for example, the United States has never had a problem with fascism, because fascism is the way to run roughshod over the workers, right? Because we have to remember that during when Hitler came to power, he forced all people, German people, to work. Even if they were on unemployment, but they had to work for free, or rather for those benefits, right? And so that's why, like, a book like The Fascist Nature of Neoliberalism comes into mind when speaking about these things, because we can see how the sort of decline of like European dictatorships in particular precipitated, right, the falling of the rate of profit, that the neoliberal change, or the turn, right, which then required having dictatorships, particularly in Latin America, install the most neoliberal, the most free market, quote unquote, policies possible, right? Because it was meant to be a new liberalism, like the one that ended with the great market crash in 1929, right? Like, capitalism should have ended then. That should have been its death, so to speak. But it wasn't. It continued on because of all these other policies that that were put into. Red Scare, McCarthyism, right? But yeah, I think it's a shame socialism got such a bad reputation. I'm not one myself, but it's unfair how. Well, yes, the whole point is socialist by definition, right? If you're questioning the world system, particularly of that system which, if you live in the United States, is what defines the United States as a nation state, and as an imperialist one at that, then of course the being maligned is going to be the way that it, what's going to happen. Whereas socialism, right? It's really interesting. I actually have, I don't know, I don't want to pull it out right now, but I actually have a copy, an original copy of the 1943, I want to say, Time magazine, when they had to talk, when they had Joseph Stalin on the cover, right? And they actually were praising the Soviet Union, and in fact, in that Time magazine, that edition, it actually talks about how, like, the industrialization of farming and all of this stuff, blah blah blah. Like, it almost seems as though, I mean, it even calls Lenin the father of modern Russia, for example. And so, you see this strange, like, in 43, Russia is in the Soviet Union in particular, right? Or rather, the Soviet Union. But they particularly do call Lenin the father of modern Russia. When they do talk about it in a beneficent way, you see that things like, well, now Russia is industrialized to the point where it actually is an important economic player on the world stage, right? And that helps the United States, for example, because it then means that it requires, blah 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 blah, et cetera, right? So again, that the shaming of socialism, the making of it, the maligning of socialists in particular, is one way that revisionists and also entryists have been able to use the idea of socialism to lead people down the wrong path in the United States in particular. But also, it's also should not come as any surprise to any socialist. Australian makes unemployed people do work for the dole often too. Yeah. Finland does that too. As much as people love to praise Finland, they do that as well. You have to work whilst receiving unemployment benefits, which seems kind of contradictory, but capitalism is a zombie lurching ever forward, looking at people to infect and brain seed. Pretty much, yeah. I'm going to need to read that work from Althusser. I haven't read any of his works yet. Yeah, on ideology is very short, but like right away he goes right. One thing I will say, that Althusser is one of those like French intellectuals that in this book does not do that thing that a lot of other ones do, right? Where they want to be very grandiloquent, right? Instead, he speaks rather simply and clearly and succinctly. And I think that is why I think his work stood the test of time, as opposed to other works that talk about ideology and they kind of get lost in the weeds, right? At least so I would think, or I would say.
Channel, improving both the quantity and the quality of these videos. You can also give one-time donations over on Ko-fi, linked in the description box below. Lastly, drop this video a like, leave a comment about your favourite socialist revolution, and share this video around on social media, as the YouTube algorithm, perhaps unsurprisingly, isn't exactly fond of promoting revolutionary left-wing media.
See, there we go, like we were just talking about that.
Especially with videos like this one, which are undoubtedly going to be demonetized. In 1968, a storm swept over the Philippines, a materially rich Southeast Asian nation.
Thank goodness I'm still fried from reading Situationist. Oh yeah. Like, see, like a lot of people like Debord, and they're like, oh well, it's short, and it like the statements are very But then you go into other stuff, right? And then if you read people that were, as it were, on the barricades with the Situationists, then you end up with like Baudrillard, right? And then the next thing you know, right?
Of 7,641 islands. The country's Communist Party, the Communist Party of the Philippines, having already been founded in 1930 by Crisanto Evangelista, was effectively refounded 35 years later as a principled revolutionary organization. The Philippines had a long history of revolution under both...
So, why is it important that from 30 to 65 there was a gap where it was, because remember, from 1898, really, I mean, and in 1902 was officialized, but 1902 to 1946, the Philippines was part of the United States. It was a territory of the United States, which, in a way, yeah, capitalism cannibalizes itself. Yes, which is a very strange thing because it also did something. Like if you think about this, right? So that's 44 years, right? Yeah, oh yeah. I mean, we know that the rate of profit has fallen precipitously, and the neoliberal turn, like the fact that they keep doing more neoliberalism when it's already, leftists, well, communists are not utopian. So as soon as you bring up a Marxist utopia, that's not us. There's a book by Engels, Marxism, Utopian or Scientific, and very much speaks against the utopian idea. Same thing with the critique of the Gotha program. We're not utopianists. Many of the, I don't want to say in general. Yeah, exactly. So yeah, socialism. Yeah. Yes. So in 1965 was the beginning of the U.S. backed. I mean, the key of it, I would say, for example, how imagine the revolutionary change it was to go from the feudal mode of production to the capitalist mode of production. I mean, you would not know how. I mean, none of us here now, when we understand this as leftists, as communists, etc., we know that we will never get to see, as it were, we will never get to be like our grandchildren, let's say, who will get to be born in a world without capitalism. We've already lived our entire lives within it and its ideology, etc. So, yeah, one step at a time, addressing fundamental motivations, and also socialism. So the only escape I see is to the third way? You're a third positionist? Is that what you're saying? That you believe that you're a third positionist? But the revolution won't be recognized until it's it can only be really recognized in retrospect. Technically, it's possible to do it peacefully, but we know how capital... The problem is capitalism... Third positionism is fascism. I mean, technically speaking, that's what it is. Keynesian model? I mean... Okay. I think that I would say that this seems as though you do not, and again, I don't know this. I'm just going to assert this just from these responses that you have given. So if I'm wrong, please feel free to correct me. That your understanding of macroeconomics, particularly in the Keynesian sense, is supposed to be seen as some in-between, that you just have high taxation, right, and lots of social benefits. It has been introduced. I mean, that's fine if they want to call it like that. If they want to see it as it were the middle, but there is no middle, right? Like, that's the point. Like I said, like politeia means wall. There's no, as it were, like in this division, there is no middle ground. There's no such thing as a centrist, right? A centrist is just someone who is right wing, but believes that policy positions themselves can be left-wing, right? And whilst functioning within bourgeois democracy. That's the issue with that. And that has to deal with like American political, understanding. But that's a whole different story, right? That's not. But what I'm saying is macroeconomically, Keynesianism theory in the class versus theory in the streets. Yeah, it's... I don't want to go into a long macroeconomic lecture because I don't think that's what you want, the key of it, and I don't think that's what chat wants either. And that's not what I want. What I would say is, what were the conditions that allowed for Keynes, one, to be Keynesian economics to be put in place, and two, what is the reasoning behind why it was removed? And if you can answer those two questions, then I think perhaps you will understand why other people are taking issue with your answer.
Spanish and US colonialism in its past, begun by the movement of Andres Bonifacio, who's honoured by the National Democratic Revolution as the founding father of modern...
Hi, holy lazy duck. Something about kings? No, we're not talking about kings. In Genesis, it's Genesis. Change my name on it there. Oh, okay. I see. Hi, it's good to see you. I just want to say one thing. It's not Bonifacio. I know that, perhaps in Ireland, that you're more likely to hear the Italian surname Bonifacio, but it's Bonifacio.
Filipino anti-imperialism. Bonifacio's revolutionary tradition was revitalized by the new CPP leadership.
So, why is it important? Well, I want to make another thing clear. Anyone who calls the Communist Party of China the CCP does not know what they're talking about. Because no communist party it's always the Communist Party of blank. Not the qualifying word Communist Party. That doesn't make any sense, right? Because then that would mean that it sees itself different, that its communism is different from the communism outside, right? That doesn't make any sense. But anyway.
This event was known as the First Great Rectification Movement. The rectification, led by figures such as Jose Maria Sison, one of the founders...
Okay, sorry, I don't mean to be pausing so much, but where he went to university, right, which is when I lived in the Philippines, and this is why I'm very interested in this, but I taught in the same department and in the same at his alma mater and in his same department where he was a student as. And when I discovered that, I thought, wow, I can't believe that someone who did this in a response to U.S. imperialism was here, and it was here where those initial links were made, right? To do, for example, the Great Rectification movement. So,
of the youth organization Kabatang Makabayan broke from the old party leadership of Jesus Lava, which chose to abandon the struggle previously fought by the Hukbalahap, the communist guerrilla force which had fought against Japanese occupation during the Second World War by effectively dissolving the party. Many Hukbalahap veterans would play key roles in the initiation of the National Democratic Revolution, which would soon follow. And apologies for the terrible pronunciations. There's undoubtedly going to be many more in this video to come. The rectification was heavily influenced by the Sino-Soviet split between the revisionist USSR led by Khrushchev and the Revolutionary People's Republic of China led by Chairman Mao.
So this is where the term like revisionism is important to keep in mind. I know there are some people that say it would have been like, people that say the USSR was revisionist are not people that are saying therefore its downfall was positive. That is not. No Maoist believes that. However, the belief, that that the downfall was therefore I don't want to say an inevitability, but became more and more probable as time went on due to revisionism, is the Maoist position, right? And so that is the Sino-Soviet split, because Khrushchev said that the USSR could peacefully coexist with capitalism. And again, as we're saying, capitalism cannot peacefully coexist with any other system but itself, right? And this is why imperialism is the dominant system, when it comes to the form of capitalism. So, which is, again, the competition between different capitalist empires, right? In this case, the three, right? Russia, China, and the United States. So, the Sino-Soviet split comes down to the question: yes or no to capitalism? And at that point, the USSR said, well, capitalism can still exist. And this is when instead the USSR goes into its period of social imperialism, right? Where it begins to exert power just like capitalist nations. That it's not liberatory, right? So the ideas of Maoists would be, how do we rectify that, right? Like, when it came to the collapse of the USSR is not a net positive, right? In fact, it was one of the greatest human disasters in history. And nobody wanted it to happen. Like this has been proven time and time again. Nobody wanted it to happen. Like, this belief that the people were yearning for, that's not true. Nobody wanted it to collapse as such anyway. However, the Maoist response to this would be, if, however, the USSR could have a great rectification, right, to remove those revisionist elements, right, that allowed for capitalism to exist within the USSR, and instead find ways to implement, right, socialism, again, on a mass scale, as during, right, with Lenin and Stalin, right? I think that's when people would say this, that then you can have, that then you could have saved the Soviet Union, right? Because then you wouldn't have had XYZ thing, right? So that's the understanding. It's that it's not so much that like some people online will be like, oh yeah, the USSR, it's better that it's gone because it went revision. No. It's that the revisionism has to be rectified, right? It has to be, like, it's the communism needs to be rectified. That's the reason why there's this idea of the reconstitution of the Communist Party, right? That the Communist Party, of those who are not willing to be social imperialists, of those who are not willing to become running dogs of capitalist imperialism, again, to quote Mao, right, will arise, right? That the workers can, that they will want that. And it is true, right? And this was the case when it came to the Sino-Soviet split, which is why, for example, Albania was one of the countries that specifically stood out, right, in its decision to instead stick on the Chinese side as opposed to the Soviet side, because it was, in essence, at the time, was one of the historically has been one of the poorest places in Europe. So social imperialism there and the market socialism of Yugoslavia well, neither of them seem like good options. You do see what I mean? So
the revolutionaries took up the theories of Mao Zedong, at the time called Mao Zedong Thought, and applied it to the conditions of the Philippines. In his book, written shortly after the rectification took place, Sisson commented on the importance of the Chinese experience to the foundation of the Filipino movement, writing that the universal theory of Marxism, Leninism, Mao Zedong thought, and the great proletarian cultural revolution have already had an incalculable impact on the concrete practice of the Philippine Revolution. The new Mao Zedong thought line of the Communist Party of the Philippines certainly contrasted the pro-Soviet line of the old leadership, which continued to support the Soviet Union while its social imperialist enterprises joined in on the plunder of the natural resources of the Philippines. Continuing the tradition of opposition to imperialism and modern revisionism, the CPP today opposes US imperialist domination of the Philippines primarily, but also Chinese social imperialist exploitation as well, which has taken the place of the Soviets. At the time, the Philippines was ruled by the brutal dictator and kleptocrat Ferdinand Marcos, the father of the current president Bongbong Marcos.
So, you see here, so again, this is just history, right? Is that the decision, right, when the Soviet Union began to see the global South as another space where, like the global North, it could also exploit and extract through imperialist means, whilst at the same time installing supposedly communist governments, right? Or participating in the imperialism of places that were already and being imperialized by the capitalist imperialist powers, is the point that we're talking about when we're talking about revisionism, is that is the immense difference between one thing and the other, right? Is that a socialist country cannot do imperialism onto another marginalized country. That goes against the very ideas of socialism. Some people will say revisionism and they'll use it to mean many, many things. But, chat, do you understand that this is the central aspect, right? When we're talking about social imperialism, this is what we're discussing, right? Is that the willingness to behave like as if you were a capitalist nation. That is the revisionism, right? Is it no longer was the Soviet Union trying to bring about, right, the end of capitalism, but rather to behave as if it were a capitalist country, and to get resources from other countries in a way that was extractive, that was, for example, even took place in places that were very much already colonized and imperialized by the capitalist powers, particularly the U.S. So that's where the issue lies, right? Like, how can the Soviet Union say that it's standing up for the workers and socialism if it's willing to create this division between its workers and the workers of the imperialized world? You know what I mean? Like, in order to be even a Marxist-Leninist, that would be against that. So, you know, that's why I think that sometimes these titles that people give themselves, yes, workers of the world unite, and that's why we have to be against social imperialism, right? Like, when China is doing the similar things, it's not that people think that it's not that we think that the People's Republic of China should be collapsed and be, like, you know, like kind of like the weird people on Reddit that want it to be balkanized, right? No, it's to say that China can no longer behave or can no longer be a capitalist country. It cannot be an imperialist country either. And nor can it hide itself, right, with the veneer of the, you know, a red aesthetic, right? Which is where I think a lot of people often, like, well, if they're capitalists, why wouldn't they want to change it to something else? Well, why would they want to do that, right? Like, there's no incentive to do those things, right? So that's one of the issues there. Like, there's no such thing as a communist billionaire. There's no such thing as a communist billionaire. Oh, thank you, on this rhythm.
The Marcos regime was marked by...
Also, the Kievit, I will give you... There's a very good documentary, but it's feature length. That's why. You're on Discord, right? If I remember... if I'm... Sorry, I'm kind of, like, forgetting right now a little bit. But... if you're in Discord, just message me and say, like, yeah. And to say, ask. Well, actually, I wanted to watch the documentary in the Discord, so I don't know. I'm playing. Like, I want to have a community night. Yes, Marcos did do a lot of torture, but he was U.S. backed, and so when the USSR, yes, I do want to have a community night. The problem is that, or the not the problem, the issue that I was having was deciding on a night or a day to do so, because at that time Polly hadn't set it for a specific date, right? So now that Polly set it on Friday, I was thinking Thursday, right? But then, I don't know. Because then I could just go on right after the stream and start playing it. And, people can go in there and watch and, participate in the conversation as much as they want. Because it is feature length. And it goes into, like, and also the reading list is great. Like, I'm telling you, like the Prolocult, so Thursdays would work good? Okay. So then after this, I'll get the documentary ready. But the Kievit still message me saying, may I have the link to the documentary? So then that way, I got a skedaddle. Okay, bye, Adadak. Thank you so much, my brother. Thank you so much for being here. So that way I can send you the link. That way you can look it up on your own. I looked up the term third way. It was used for a social democracy before Giddens, but the connotations changed towards that. So I was wrong to use the term unifuck. I mean, again, like, some people, like, for example, I know that when I was doing my PhD, right, I had a professor that was in his 80s. Right? Oh, give me one quick second. Wrong. I turn on the wrong one. I turned on computer audio. But anyway, yes, you should be skeptical. Exactly, Miss Frizzle. Exactly. But the need is, again, this is why, for example, Mao writes oppose book worship, right? Like, it's not about thinking that this is the end all be all, but rather it's learning the methodology, right? Like, dialectical materialism is a method by which to understand history. It doesn't mean that it's the only one, but it's the one that, again, like, if you've read Althusser, or if you've, blah, 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 if you add on other things to it, right, can help you understand a lot of things. Like, But also, medieval and ancient history, that's also another space where a lot of what we think is history, right, is rather what people created later on saying it was the case, right? Oh, thank you so much, Scribble Hearts. That means so much to me. Like the Spartans, for example, lived, and I'm not even joking, in the shadow of the characters that people made up about them, right? Like, they were not actually like how Leonidas was portrayed. They were not these, like, 9,000, over 9,000 testosterone, blah, blah, blah. Like, that wasn't true. And that was actually a big problem because people expected the Spartans, the Spartans and the Laconians, as they are also called, that general area, to be like that, and they weren't, right? And so people, even to this day, right, even to this day, still think of Spartans as what was written about them long after, right, the Leonidas, etc., like all these figures that they were writing about, were even alive. And again, when I remember, discussing that, how like even people's idea of what tradition is also built up on this idea that well, one, it's based on a liberal humanist idea. That is to say that the good ideas, right, win out, right, from the bad ideas, which is not how that works, right? Like, like this is why, again, method is what's important. Going postcat mode to pick up the Fambi. Okay, no worries. Spartans were keen to avoid wars for the most part because they knew it was bullshit, and the vicious traditions were mostly invented. Yes, exactly, for the sake of tourism. Yes, I think those ideas are building block of libertarianism. Hi, non-toxic bleach. It's so good to see you. Yeah, the 300 Spartans were on. Behind them were 300 thespians, and like what that term now is used to speak of, right? 700. So there was 1,000 people at one point, and starts with John Stuart Mill. You're right. Definitely. Technically, I would say it would begin with people like John Locke, right? But I see what you mean by John Stuart Mill for sure. But again, it's this wanting to. For example, even like this is something that goes back to what we were bringing up about economics, was the central narrative in The Wealth of Nations, right, by Adam Smith, particularly in books 1, but he also John Locked and Loaded. I love that. Okay, bye, Adadak. See you soon. There were 300 lesbians in the back. Makes sense. They had 300 twinks out front. Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. Like the Spartans were actually very like Adadak said, didn't actually like to fight. Like this whole like, oh, you've got to be like a Spartan and you have to be out there with your sword. It's like literally like there are parts of like the capital of Sparta, where it was like it was like essentially kind of like yes, I suppose we can say that. Although again, it's very difficult to use those terms because, like, that's us presentizing, right? That's us seeing them through modern identities. But I'm not saying that you're wrong, right? I'm not saying that you're wrong at all. But yeah, I think you know what I mean.
Years of martial law, the presence of U.S. military bases, over 1,900...
Which Clark Air Force Base is still there. And under the last president, Duterte, although he tried to play, like, fast and loose sometimes by getting armaments and stuff from China, still signed an agreement that led now the United States to be able to use all of the Filipino airfields, etc. Do you think Smith is a bad person? I always think of definite change a bit. Well, look. Well, this is what I was going to say about John Locke. Is that pardon me, not John Locke. Adam Smith. Is that the central story that he begins with to define what economics is, to then make the point about the invisible hand, etc., etc. We also must remember in Book 3 on the Wealth of Nations that Adam Smith is also against landlords. Hi, Zach. How are you? It's good to see you. Welcome to the stream. So I mean, we have to remember that in Book 3 in the Wealth of Nations, again, Adam Smith was anti-landlord, right? Just like Mao. In fact, he's the one that called landlords. I know the last part. But he's he's the one that called an entity parasitical upon the lands of England, right? And so, again, because that is a feudal, land rent is a feudal thing that still exists to this day, right? Same thing like the established churches, etc., right? Same thing like marriage, right, as we know it now, right? That's also a medieval institution that, right? And this is why, for example, capitalism has been trying to decide, right, what marriage is and what a family is for a very long time, right? Thank you so much, Ferret King, for giving Zach up a gift sub. Now you do not have to suffer through the ads. Oh my goodness. Thank you so much for following, and yay, we hit our daily sub goal. Thank you so much, Non-Toxic Bleach, for the 100 bits. That's awesome. Yes, let's go. Now everybody get cozy.
96 forced disappearances, mass malnutrition, and previously, according to the Guinness Book of Records, the greatest robbery of a government through Marcos' rampant pocketing of huge sums of money. Of course, this record was mysteriously removed from the Guinness Book of Records website in the aftermath of the election of his son this year. As expressed in one of the most important documents of the rectification, Rectify Our Errors and Rebuild the Party, CSUN identified Mao's military theory of protracted people's war as necessary to resist Marcos' rule. And after the party...
Well, that's what I was saying, that we cannot look at... Again, I know that, I know what you're trying to say, the Kievet, but also Soup for My Breadline does understand that, right? That is why I said earlier, we don't try to presentize things. It was just joking. It was just joking. It was in jest. But I'm glad that you understand that, right? That because a lot of people don't, and they want to attribute the idea of an identity now as if it existed before. It's the same thing I've said a lot of times now with the nuclear family. When people read about the family in the Bible, right, a family in the Bible, they think it looks like a nuclear family, but that is not true, right? That's why, when they say Lot's daughters, right, because people often remember blah, 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 right? The Lot's daughters did this to the... They might not, the way, again, if the Tanakh is the best way to understand it. Yeah, it has more wives, but also another thing too is that all the children throughout history, orgies have happened regardless. That's exactly right, Zakab. That's exactly right. back in earlier stages of history, particularly, again, as I've said before, the Tanakh should best be understood as the history, right? A sort of a history of the transition from a tribal society to a slave society, right? And then to in the late classical period, right, where you essentially begin to see the beginnings of what will become a feudal society, but definitely not anything like well, actually no, I would just say a slave society, because yeah, like even with the added stuff, it's pretty much slave society. I mean, that's essentially what you're witnessing, right? So not only did Abraham have more wives, but all of the children he had with all of his wives would have called all of them mother, right? Like that's the thing, right? Like our idea of your mother being one person, right, that has this like eternal connection to you, right? Especially in the way of almost thinking of children as property, right? Comes from the nuclear family, which is a 19th century concept, because the idea of people owning their children as people still think of it today doesn't make any sense if you go back, several centuries before. I think I'm a bit naive. I always try to distance myself from politics because I view the world going to shit. Well, I mean, you can view the world going to shit, but yeah, for most of history, humans were migratory. Yeah, exactly, and that's the reason why. Like, if you read the Tanakh, if you read it in its totality, it makes sense to me, right? That it essentially describes a people, right, that again went from these Canaanite tribes that had believed in different gods, and then once you have them become more identifiable nation, right? What you end up seeing is where is it that most of the not the Torah but the rest of the where does most of it take place? Babylonia, which was the hotbed, which was where most of the Jewish people lived, even during when Rome was in control of Palestine, right? Like, that's the reason why the Talmud that the Jewish people use is the Talmud Bavli, right? The Babylonian Talmud, not the Talmud Yerushalmi. Like, you would think, oh, the Jerusalem Talmud, that must be what is the most important, but it's not, because the population, the yeshivas that were existing in Palestine were not seen as great as the ones that existed where most Jewish people lived at that time, which was in Babylonia. And so that's why you see where does the book of Esther take place? It takes place in Persia, right? Where does Daniel take place? Where does et cetera, et cetera. And so again, it's talking about people migrating all over the place. I mean, Abraham is by definition someone who migrates, right? Like, that's why, for example, his name in Hebrew, Avraham HaIbri, right? And this even is like the basis of the name Ivrim, which means Hebrews, right? And Ivrit, which means the Hebrew language, means from the other side, or from the other bank of the river, right? And that's its description of Abraham, right? That he came from the other side of the Euphrates or the Tigris River, and then he made his way over into what is now, or to what is the land, to what was the land of Canaan, right? So yes, yeah, it's all. I mean, it's a story all about migration. Hence, why you have the migration into Egypt, right? Like, oh, I mean, and it even says very human reasons why, right? There's a drought. There's not enough food. So therefore, Joseph tells everybody that he knows, all of his brothers, hey, come live down with me in Egypt, right? Because here, there's food, right? So, like, for very pragmatic, it's not some divine reason. It's a pragmatic one, right? And I think, to me, that says a lot as well. Which is why, again, if we're reading it as a historical text, and we remove the miracles, etc., this is why most of the narrative doesn't even take place in Palestine. It takes place in Persia, In fact, the only person that's ever called the Messiah is King Cyrus, right? The Persian emperor. So, do Romans not have it with the patriarch? No. Mm-mm. No, because they also didn't have a nuclear family. Now Romans are portrayed pater familias again. Well, with Rome, I would say it's a bit different because that's when you already have a slave society, so it's different, right? That's where you do have the conditions of people being passed on through generations, and I'm talking about in the tribal society. But the paterfamilias that you're describing is something once Rome is not a tribal society, right? Like if we were to be talking about this would be when we would be talking about the Latini, right? Or as they sometimes called themselves, the Aborigini, right? That lived in Latium, where what is now called Lazio in Italy, but particularly in Rome, when they were a tribal group. Because not every tribe is a nation, right? And not every people group that's not white is not a tribe. Please, like, that is my one rule. Like, please do not call everything a tribe. I stated that the nuclear family, yeah, it did emerge in the 19th century. But the idea of having a patriarch in a family, like, patriarchy is not from the 19th century, if that makes sense. But the nuclear family, if there's a mother, that there's a father, one mother who have legitimate children whom they can claim dominion over, I guess is one way to put it, right? That is a 19th century concept. The idea of legitimacy and other such things were not as important in previous societies, especially not tribal societies. So the further you go back, the less that becomes the case. And this is also why you have rules that say that if a husband were to die, right, of a wife, that then the brother takes the place of the wife. Yeah, like the family was, like, the pater familias is even that is the idea is that they are not just with one wife, right? Because you have concubinage, right? And that's another thing too, which is a class distinction, right? So again, like that's where this is where these differences, right, begin to add up, right? You have, as long as you have concubinage in a slave society, kind of like then that means that they're also your children, and if you want, you can recognize those children, right, as one of your heirs, if the children for whatever marriage you have, etc., right, you don't want to recognize, this one wife didn't give you sons, but this concubine gave you only sons, right? That's very common in Roman society. So pretty logical to pin it, since slavery was abolished in the West in the 19th century. I mean, technically, slavery was illegal under the Persian Empire. That's the reason why Nietzsche says that in the war between the Greeks and the Persians, the Persians should have won, because they would have literally have liberated all of the slaves of Greece, and would have brought upon. And if you read it in a Marxist understanding, it would have brought upon class society sooner than otherwise, because the Greeks. The Persians at the time of Xerxes did not have slavery. It was illegal. Slavery was illegal, and that was because that is one of the foundational aspects of Zoroastrianism, that the condition of slavery cannot exist. So, that's why I would say that, were there slaves ever in what has historically been called Persia? Sure. But does that mean that it has always had it? No. It's the same thing. There already was the concept of freedom of speech developed in the subcontinent thousands of years ago, through a story that's actually, interestingly enough, a religious story, that the gods wanted to watch the humans produce like a drama, right, a play, and so the humans wrote a comedy making fun of demons. Yeah, sure, please do. I would be more than happy to check it out. Trust me, I have no problem being incorrect or needing to course correct, etc., whatever. That's not the issue. I'm just saying, but we know about distinctive families that had them, even if it was forbidden. I mean, again, I'm not going to say that nobody in the Persian Empire would have ever have had slaves, but again, this depends on which time period you're talking about. Is it like under the Achaemenids? Is it, you know what I mean? Like, Persia, I mean, even that as a concept is the Greek idea of what Persia is, because that's their, they call it Persia because at that time, under the Achaemenids, and that's a whole, I mean, that's very early on, right? Like, that's not, I read this through, no worries. I'm talking about, like, later on with the Sasanians, etc. Like, this is far, the Achaemenids, like, very early on, I understand what you mean. That is a different thing, because that's when they still had a different religious system as well. Like, they did not have Zoroastrianism yet. Once you have Zoroastrianism become the state religion, it necessitates the manumission of slaves. So that's, yes, exactly. Yes. That's why, that's why I brought up Sasanians, because I guess that's when I think of the Persian Empire, I think of that. I usually would call the Achaemenid Empire the Achaemenid Empire. No, the Achaemenid Empire existed before Zoroastrianism became codified in the gosh, why am I forgetting? Well, I mean, in before even like the Gothas were written, right? And the Gothas are, I mean, to show its relationship, state codified, exactly. Like, once it becomes the state religion, right? In the same way how, like, once Christianity becomes the state religion of Rome, right? Many societal things change because of that. But the rulers can adhere to that religion. Yeah, exactly. Like, I mean, and there are even times when there's an interruption, right? With, like, Julian the Apostate, right? After Constantine had already made Christianity, right? You had, like, 3 emperors, and then that upheld it, and then you had Julian the Apostate who said, no, we have to go back to the, return with the V, right, and go back to, Hellenistic paganism, right? So, I mean, history's too fraught for me to be like, oh, he sat there short, right, 1661 to 1663. I mean, again, I have no idea. I mean, off the top of my head, I'm not a Iranianist. I mean, like David is. David Miano, who we're going to watch after this, once we're done with this, he is a Near Eastern. His specialty is Near Eastern ancient history. So perhaps that would be a better person to ask, I would say, because again, that is not. I am much more knowledgeable of things having to do, for example, in Jewish history. So that's why I know that. That's why lots of Jewish people did live in the Persian Empire, wrote that they were glad that there was no slavery, for example. And then there were some people that oddly complained because they were like, oh, like if I bring my family over, because they were like merchants or whatever, right? And so they were like, if I bring my family over, they can't bring the slaves because then they would be manumitted on setting foot, so to speak, right? Metaphor, right? I mean, literally to some extent, but also metaphorically, on Persian soil, right? Kind of like what the British did, right? Where they would, or some abolitionists who had ships that flew the British flag, right? that when they would sail around the American coast, right, some people would specifically take people that had been enslaved, right, and then sail them out. So that way, once they touched British, terra firma, well, technically the boat, they would immediately be manumitted, because in Britain in 1830 you have the legal case that ends slavery. But anyway, give me one quick second. I have to answer this phone call. Okay, back. Sorry, sorry it took so long. I wasn't expecting it to take that long, but so it was. So it was. Anyway, so back to our discussion. I'll just keep the video playing now.
Leadership re-established the CPP. They wasted no time in initiating it. On the 29th of March 1969...
I'm good, Tempo. How about you?
Members of the Communist Party of the Philippines, Kabatang Makabayan and Huk Balahap, formed the New People's Army to begin the People's Democratic Revolution put forward by the CPP's new, rejuvenated and revolutionary political line. Beginning in the countryside with only 60 fighters, the NPA would quickly see exponential growth. CSON reported that by 1972, just 3 years later, the NPA had increased in size to 800 dedicated Red Fighters. These ranks would continue to swell despite the repression implemented by Marcos with the aid of the US military, which was fighting to kill off a number of other revolutionary struggles in Southeast Asia at the time, such as the Vietnamese resistance, which at the time of the foundation of the New People's Army was at its peak. CSON himself would fall victim to this repression when he was arrested and tortured for nearly 9 years in 1977. This fate would be shared by many of the revolutionary leaders, such as one of the NPA's founders, Comrade Dante, who disappeared from revolutionary politics after his release. However, despite the constant loss of leading figures of the CPP and NPA, the revolution would continue to march steadily forward and maintain a firm revolutionary political line. In 1973, the mass front of the National Democratic Revolution, the National Democratic Front of the Philippines, was founded, of which the New People's Army, Kabataan Makabayan and the Communist Party of the Philippines are member organizations, alongside the likes of Makiki Baka, the women's wing of the revolution. The National Democratic Front of the Philippines is broad in scope by design, seeking to unite the Filipino Revolution with what it calls the Progressive Alliance. The Communist Party of the Philippines, the New People's Army and the National Democratic Front all form the three key cornerstones of what Chairman Mao called the three magic weapons of the revolution.
So, it's important here to note that yes, Mao listed the three magic weapons, which are the Communist Party, the People's Army, and the United Front, right? And these three, again, he describes them as magic weapons, but you don't necessarily have to use that terminology, are the foundation of, again, and Tempo, I don't know if you would perhaps wish to explain like how these ideas are what makes Marxism, Leninism, Maoism, right, like a higher stage of Marxism, right, from Marxism, Leninism, right. And again, I want to be clear that Joma, who again I taught at his alma mater, and I'm very proud of that, as you can tell from me bringing it up in the first place. Is recently passed away, and was living not a very nice existence. Okay, see you later, the Kivit. It was nice talking to you too. Thank you. So I don't know if you would like to explain that aspect, because I was trying to go into how like these foundational steps, Tempu, are what later, I guess, what we could say is I guess synthesize. Yeah. I don't want to get too. Hi, Chemi Retro. Yeah. I just want to explain that the part of like the higher stage and how these three things are sort of necessary for that. Because I kind of explained it a little bit, but I went sort of and I guess I wouldn't say that these three things are the basis of it, but there's more, right? Yeah, it is too long of a message for Twitch, but I guess kind of if you can explain very briefly for me, just in chat, right? Like since I know that you're MLM sort of like kind of, like the bullet points, right, of like 2-line struggle, right, blah blah blah, right, like the aspects that make Marxism, Leninism, Maoism different from just Marxism, Leninism, for example. Yeah, yeah, like, again, I'm not gonna defend everything, but I'm gonna say that, again, one of the people that led the, again, people can have bad takes all the time and be great people still. Or be, as it were, in one sense correct, but not have a correct opinion about this or that, right?
The Communist Party, the People's Army, and the United Front. The key events in the initiation of the National Democratic Revolution aligned with the 1970 First Quarter Storm, which was a time of extreme urban unrest and huge growth in the Philippines for radical politics in the youth. In response to the First Quarter Storm and the beginning of the revolution, Ferdinand Marcos would declare martial law, which he would use to assume total power for years. Marcos would later...
Another thing too is, like, video games will let you, like I forget what it's the name of the video game, but I almost want to say it's a Call of Duty game, but I'm pretty sure it's not. But it's like Call of Duty, where it's like you essentially can play. I think it's in the Philippines, or it might be Vietnam. Maybe I don't want to confuse the two. But anyway, like, essentially you're trying to put down this revolution, right? You're trying, like, that is one of your missions that you have to do. And why this is happening in the 70s is because this is a time. Yeah, protracted People's War and the Great Proletarian People's Cultural Revolution. Yes, yeah. I think to me that's a good way of putting it succinctly. So what in essence you have at this time, and this is also when you start to see the rise in separatism. Most come from Mao Zedong thought. Although I forget who wrote it. Who wrote the following, but it's like Mao Zedong thought has become, right, that has become what MLMs mean, right? Like, that's like, there is no, like, you cannot claim that as being just an addition, right? Now it's a whole new. That was the I knew, I couldn't remember where, but I'm like, I know that it's,
be overthrown in what's known as the Democratic EDSA Revolution, although he was replaced by Cory Aquino's US-backed government, which, despite...
Hi, Old Snake Twitch, how are you?
...releasing political prisoners from the CPP, such as Sison, quickly resumed the repressive policies of the Filipino comprador state.
So what does comprador in this sense mean? It means that there's a comprador bourgeoisie. That's good to hear, Old Snake Twitch. I'm glad to hear that. The bourgeoisie that is willing to aid the imperialist in the super exploitation, hyper exploitation for the imperialist super profits, because they are essentially given like a supervisory role, right? If you can think of it, right, in that kind of way. So they are allowed to live a bourgeois lifestyle. And they are allowed to live, again, at the very pinnacle of the societies in which they are in power, while they allow for the immiseration and the destruction of the countries and the working classes.
Just the 1987 Mendiola massacre were instrumental in the CP.
Yeah, I mentioned social imperialism earlier too, and the anti-revisionism, like what we mean. When we say, like, what is revisionism, what is social imperialism, right? That was one of the things that I went into because in the beginning of this video, I think Paul talks about, like, the USSR being social imperialist, right? And so I just wanted to explain that.
PP's decision to continue its revolution against all of the successive post-Marcos comprador regimes, regardless of whether or not they wore a more progressive, liberal-friendly mask. The EDSA revolution was certainly a success.
I think, to me, that's a very important point. It doesn't matter how progressive they seem if they are still allowing for the violence of capitalism to be enacted upon the working classes of the country. Then, they can claim to be progressive and socially forward, etc., 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 but that's not actually what they are, right? They are using that as a way in order to to, for example, be given a green light by other imperialist countries, especially like the United States, right? Where it's like now they don't install necessarily the military dictatorships of the 50s and 60s. Now instead you have these like, oh, the democratically elected blah blah blah, right? That they're progressive, etc. That like there's a really good book called Represent and Destroy, where it's like the language of liberal, right, diversity, blah blah blah. Like, my daughter's upset because she said dog food should be free because it's for dogs and they don't have any money. I mean, that makes perfect sense to me. I mean, dogs, if anything, give you back far more value than, you know what I mean? Like, they get, like, dogs will stay with you. Like, I've seen so many unhoused people, and they have dogs, and when I see them share their food with their dogs, right? It just, well, one, it breaks my heart to know that anybody is unhoused, and I try to help in any way I can. But I hate that in some of I forget. I don't want to. I can't. I shouldn't probably bring it up. Never mind. I don't want to bring it up because it's too close.
Successful mass movement. But without the revolutionary transformation of the ownership of the means of production, distribution, and exchange, a transformation of the society's relations of production, a change of the Filipino state's true class character remained impossible. Since then, the CPP also went through a second great rectification beginning in 1991, this time against what it deemed
I have to note that the Philippines People's War is still in a strategic defense and not strategic equilibrium. Yes, that is true. Like, when I was living in the Philippines, and this is the thing, when I was living in the Philippines, even then, one, it was, how should I put it? If you don't want to get caught, for example, with, I'm thinking of the cover, right, of Sison's, The Principles of Marxism-Leninism, right? You do not want to be caught with any of that stuff, right? Like, that's not something you see people just bringing out. Like, here in America, right? Like, people will bring out the Communist Manifesto, which, I mean, I think is not necessarily the best text to read first, but, like, people will read Marx, right, in public, right? When I was living in the Philippines, like, the difference was, again, if you were a foreigner, if you were white, it was different, but because I was, interestingly enough, people would see me as Filipino, which I mean, I'm not from the Philippines, and my family's not from the Philippines, but oftentimes people would speak to me in Tagalog right away, like they wouldn't think that I was someone that was from another country, and then I would say, oh, I'm Mexican, and then they would be like, oh, okay, blah blah blah. But anyway, because of this, like, I knew that if you were from, say, an imperialized country and were caught with stuff that you weren't supposed to have, it wasn't going to end very well for you. Now, academics could talk about Marx if they wanted to, but, like, that's because they're not talking about it in a context that actually is, I don't want to say dangerous, but in a way that actually could have consequences for the comprador bourgeoisie, right? So again, like, this is something that, this is why a lot of their images of them are in the countryside, right? And that's something to keep in mind too. It's like, they're in the countryside also because that's another aspect I would add along with what Tempu said with Protracted People's War and the Great Proletarian Cultural Revolution, is that Mao's understanding of the necessity of the peasantry becoming a revolutionary class, and using that understanding to also analyze the fact that most of the global South exists in a semi-colonial, semi-feudal state. It is one of those things that I think differentiates from other things. So anyway, For anyone who doesn't know, strategic equilibrium means revolutionary forces have the same power as the reactionary arm, and the United Front can begin construction of a new power as an embryonic part of the future dictatorship of the proletariat. Right. Like when I was in the Philippines, that was when they first, well, not first, but that's when they began to have skirmishes, I guess as they would call them in the news, with the National Democratic Revolutionaries, etc. And so and because I lived in Quezon City, which is more inland than Manila is, it's closer also to the mountains that was occurring. So there's that. So I do remember that like there was activity nearby, but again, it was mostly in as you said in now particularly it's in a very much a defensive space, not proactive, but rather
deviation.
In equilibrium.
Rather than right opportunists, or as they were known, the rejectionists. Since the breakaway of the rejectionists, they've largely fallen into sectarianism and obscurity, buried by history.
Thank you so much, Frank Drescher.
This reminds us of the importance of never venturing too far ahead of the masses with left opportunism, nor lagging behind with right opportunism in the building of a successful revolutionary political line. As mentioned earlier, the People's Democratic Revolution, through organizations such as the National Democratic Front, aims to unite a broad base of the Filipino people under what it calls national democracy. National democracy, in summary, is the program of the Filipino Revolution which unites all classes and strata hostile to semi-feudalism and imperialism under the leadership of the proletariat to build new democracy, similar to the program of the Chinese Revolution in 1949. The National Democratic Revolution lays the ground for the development towards socialism by eliminating semi-feudalism and bureaucrat capitalism and progressing forwards through successive proletarian cultural revolutions. Today, the program of national democracy is outlined by a 12-point program. The 12-point program of the National Democratic Front of the Philippines reads as follows. 1. Unite the people.
I don't wanna live out the leftist meme, right? That like it's always with lots of words, but I think one is perhaps one of the is I would highlight this one in particular. Unite the people to overthrow the semi-colonial and semi-feudal system through a people's war and for the completion of the National Democratic Revolution, right? So the reason why I think that number one is very important is because this is why when they brought up the 70s, I meant to say something earlier, but I'm just saying it now, is that at the same time was when in Mindanao, where you have as they are called, the Moro people, right, which again is interesting because that's another group of people that were constructed by colonialism, right? Like the people that try to deny that the white people create other races, right? Like one example that's very evident is with the Moro people. Like they've become a people, but that's because they've become separate from the peoples of Luzon in particular, but also and this was a dichotomy based on religion, right? Because in the south, in Mindanao, you have more of a Muslim population that used to be part of the Sultanate of Sulu, as it was called then. So when the Spanish arrive and they first take over the Philippines, first they take over the area, what is now called Cebu City, and begin their colonization in there. And the northern parts of the Philippines were the parts that were integrated into the Spanish Empire very quickly, particularly through a program of Catholic conversion, right, of Catholic indoctrination in the literal sense, right, as a Catholic would say, right, not in the necessarily negative sense, but technically it is negative, right, but in the sense of trying to convert the peoples of Luzon from being that had held on to more pagan beliefs, I guess if you want to call it that, or animist beliefs, etc., to recognizing Christianity. In the South, that was more difficult because there already was a monotheism there, right? And so this division is something that still exists in the Philippines to this day. And in the 70s is when you began to have violence, violent resistance, right? That was warranted, right? In the sense that it was the people from Mindanao that were being repressed by the Marcos regime in particular, and like having their lands taken away, being given to, sometimes literally the Roman Catholic Church, but usually given to, U.S. companies, etc., to do this, is why, of course, you have this, again, violence, revolutionary violence as well. So to unite the people and to do a people's war is something that the Communist Party of the Philippines has been working to do alongside the Moro people, right? To also have them be part of this democratic revolution that will remove the semi-colonial, semi-feudal systems and to complete a democratic revolution so that no longer will they be subjected to, right, the marginalization that they have faced, right? Thus, for now going on hundreds of years, since 1565. So it's about to be 500 years since it's been going on. So establish a People's Democratic Republic, and all of this stuff. But again, you see these elements in here that come directly from Mao, right? Like the People's Army, right? The aspect of semi-colonial, semi-feudal, implement genuine agrarian reform. And this is something that I've mentioned before, like the reason why people say that like the Mexican Revolution and the constitution that it developed in 1917 what is, as it were, revolutionary, if not very progressive, is because it recognizes, and I think this is where I feel that in Latin America the focus on Mariátegui is, well, I mean, one, I understand why people focus on Mariátegui, but I feel that if you look at the Mexican communists, etc., who were also wanted the Mexican Revolution to be a socialist revolution, right? And their ideas and how some of them are, to some extent, represented in the 1917 Constitution. Obviously now, over 100 years later, it's not perfectly enforced, obviously. But the idea of land reform being central is something that in semi-colonial, semi-feudal states is one of the most important aspects of the revolution that has to be done. Hence why you have to consider the needs of the peasantry.
For the overthrow of the semi-colonial and semi-feudal system through a people's war and for the completion of the National Democratic Revolution. 2. Establish a People's Democratic Republic and a democratic coalition government. 3. Build the People's Army and a People's Defense System. 4. Uphold and promote the people's democratic rights. 5. Terminate all unequal relations with the United States and other foreign entities.
And it's very important that they name the United States in this because the United States saw the Philippines revolting against the Spanish and used their desire to unshackle themselves from Spanish colonialism to then incorporate the Philippines into their own empire, right? Which is what has happened with Puerto Rico, for example, as well, and with Guam, etc., right? In some places, of course, you have an indigenous population, that is to say, population that was there antebellum, right, and also prior to the movement of settlers into that land, such as Puerto Rico. And in fact, many people have written about how the very, very, very bad conditions in Puerto Rico, right? Like the fact that it's not represented in Congress, the fact that hasn't become a state yet, one and two, which are separate points, I feel, but the actual usage of it as a place of imperialism, even though it's technically part of the United States, right? The fact that also you have a displaced, or rather a diaspora that is linked to this place, that sees itself as separate from the United States, right? That is to say that Puerto Rico and Puerto Ricans already have a national identity, but the United States, through its colonialism, through its colonial relations with Puerto Rico, technically, right, might see them as an ethnic group, but also, and does this on purpose, right? Does this to obfuscate the fact that there's already a national identity and a diaspora, right? But that diaspora is caused purposefully by the immiseration of the working classes of the island, right? In particular, allowing for Puerto Rican areas, right, to remain without power for months, right, after Hurricane Maria, right, or whatever it might be, so as to compel thousands of people to leave the island and sell their property, for example, and then move to the United States, or stateside, I should say, and then allow for the colonization of Puerto Rico by white settlers. And that is something that has occurred over time. And in the Philippines, I mean, I know people to this day, or rather, I shouldn't say I know them, like I don't know them personally, but like I've seen people argue that like the biggest mistake was after World War II to let the Philippines gain its independence, right, or to give it rather its independence, right. This scholar on YouTube, right, who is like a wannabe like Mearsheimer pretty much, is essentially saying that like there's no such thing as such, like oh yes, and you can feel that when you're there, like Clark Air Force Base. I mean, it's like, I don't even know how to describe it. Like I mean, even the embassy in Manila is given this like point of prominence that's like I've never really seen anywhere else, with the only exception being that in Baghdad, right, especially during the when the United States and the coalition were still there, right, the Western and the capitalist coalition, like that was the largest U.S. embassy in the world, and I think technically it still is, but Manila's very much up there because it's this enormous building. I mean, enormous. And there is no way that enormous building is just there to give people visas, because most people's visas get rejected instantly. So, anyway.
6. Implement genuine agrarian reform, promote cultural cooperation, raise rural production and employment through modernization of agriculture and rural industrialization, and ensure agricultural sustainability.
So, I don't know if Alt Miss Frizzle is still in chat, but like that number 6 is something that is where people who are, again, educators on one hand, but also scientists, right, that are aware of science, that are actually know this is where something like or the reconstituted Communist Party, for example, again, I'm just using the terms because these are the terms being used in the video, right? Right, in order to make my case or my point, right? This is where someone like you, Alt Miss Frizzle, and someone like Homozygote and other such people would have to be part of the decision making, right? Would have to be part of implementing those plans, because it's not the rejection of everything that came prior. It's using the people who, even though they went to bourgeois institutions, were able to remain principled leftists and want to use their knowledge to bring about, right, these important aspects here that are being spoken of. So that's somewhere where rural industrialization, well, what is that going to look like? How are we going to make sure it protects the environment so that we do not have what already exists in the Philippines now, where entire rivers that used to be, before, there used to be, like, you could take ships, well, perhaps smaller. I don't know about ships, but definitely boats, right? Smaller, that you could sail them up rivers deep inland into the area around Manila. Now they're also polluted. And I'll never forget just watching all of this trash, just like from all of these factories, just like floating on top of it, right? And it's like the people are compelled to work at the factory in order to live, but even the factory is also. I saw a very little bit of the countryside, unfortunately. Manila's enormous. Metro Manila is like enormous. That's why I feel like it's kind of like Mexico City, right? It's like you can go to a part where there is countryside, but you're so far away that it's you're not even in Mexico City anymore. But I saw some to the east, and that's why I got to hear on the news that you had the the NDR stuff that was going on, right? Because they don't like to report on that on the main, especially the English language newspapers that they have there in Manila. They would rather not. They never print stuff like that. For a reason, right? Obviously. And so being out there and knowing Tagalog helped a lot, because then and I also can understand Chabacano, because it's one of the few Spanish Creoles in the world. So because I also can understand that and speak that as well, it also meant that when I visited that area, and there's not as much of the national media there, it's more regional. That's where you begin to hear these areas and these areas have already and it's interesting too, because the smaller the farther away I was from the metropolis, which again was only once. I can only say really one time, even though I'm making it seem like it was more, but because only one real time was I can't see a tall building, or I can't see one of the main streets that heads into Manila or Quezon City, or the highways, right? Because Manila is so full of people, right? It has so many. It's so dense that it has something that, when Hong Kong did it, they're like, oh wow, it's so innovative, right? Manila already has that, where it has to have an upper sidewalk. It has one street level and another one above, right? And also in its highways, it has highways inside of its highways. That's how densely populated it is. So imagine you're driving on the freeway, and underneath where you're driving, there's another freeway. That's how densely populated it is. So when you no longer see things like that, Tempu, that's when you know you're really far out. And so, but the farther out you go, it's very interesting, because it makes me think that that the media campaign and I hesitate to say the word propaganda, if only because people take it in the negative sense, that in the U.S. it's used, but like the propagation, right, as what propaganda means, that which is propagated, right, the propaganda of the NDP, right, is particularly doing numbers, right, so to speak, right, like it's reaching people that even people that are living in the where the rural starts to give way to the semi-urban, and then to the suburban, and then to the urban, right? And I think, to me, that's a very good thing, right? Because then it means that the people that are working, say, in Metro Manila, and let me tell you, it is not easy to meet with an actual communist in Manila, like, and in Quezon City, like you would imagine. Like, they want to know about you. Like, you know what I mean? Like, they don't just trust people. Hi, Photophile. It's so good to see you. Yeah, their propaganda is very good. So I was glad to see that the questioning was already there. But the problem was that I wish that they would. They needed to do more. Well, at the time, they weren't doing enough to talk about China's social imperialism, right? Which I think was the main issue that I had, was that, focusing, the youth is with the CPP for sure. And that's why I'm saying, like, the areas that are becoming, right, like exurbs of Manila, right, that are more younger people, right, because it's less expensive and all of that stuff, right, and even like more people that go to university, etc. Now that there are building, it's what all of that stuff, right? It has only been benefiting them. Like, definitely, it's very different from if you read the history of it. Like in the 70s is probably the worst possible time, because you had, sometimes you would have the Islamic, nationalists from Mindanao, right? Like, they would see both the Marcos regime and the, as equal enemies, because, etc. And that was for a very short period, right? And that's something that I think the CPP, they were defeated. They signed an official thing, yes, and then which then defined their area in the Philippines. But Duterte started to, because Duterte's from the south. He's from down south, so he was causing problems again. Like, he was the one that was like, oh, let's give that land to make it American Air Force Base, right? The Moro people are the most are some of the most anti-American for good reason, I would say, because when the Americans were literally had it as a colony, again, they kept that racial distinction between the Moro people and the Tagalog people, or the etc. blah blah blah. And so there's a lot of history that I would have to go in for that, but yes, they did eventually sign a peace treaty. I guess you could call it that. I can't remember exactly what it's called, but it essentially said, give us our, let us have an autonomous region. It does not mean, however, that the efforts of to gain more rights, etc., ever stopped. It's just that the violence of particularly 71 to 75 was gone. And again, it's during that 4-year period that you see the CPP sometimes, catching strays, mainly because again, they wanted to unite forces, but that meant, right, having people that are Tagalog, that are seen as not Moro, right, and not Muslim, and allowing them to be part of, so again, like I said, it's a historical thing, right? It's because also at the same time, I'm saying this, but the World Championship of Chess of FIDE, right? The International Federation of Chess had its final between Karpov and Korchnoi in the Philippines, right? During this time, during the dictatorship, in Baguio City, and you know what I mean. And like I remember because Anatoly Karpov, well, I mean, a lot of weird stuff. But anyway, like, he went to go watch a basketball game in Manila, blah, blah, blah. So, like, you know, it's like, it's this really strange time that stuff is happening. Also because the president, I think, or the chairman or whatever, like, the person in charge, like, the main guy that's, like, there at the officiating, right, the World Championship of Chess, was Filipino. So that's why there's a lot of like, oh, you know, that they, like, because Karpov won, right? So they're like, oh, you know, obviously money, blah, 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 which doesn't even make any sense because, I mean, Korchnoi was he was representing the Netherlands technically, but I mean, like, anyway, I'm not even going to get
7.
into that.
Break the US big comprador landlord dominance over the economy. Carry out national industrialization and build an independent and self-reliant economy. 8. Adopt a comprehensive and progressive...
By the way, self-reliant does not mean autarky in this case. It's not like Juche in that sense. It means that no longer... And I think Tempu, you can correct me if I'm wrong, and please do. And others in chat, please correct me if I'm wrong, if you know. But they use that language because they want to reclaim the idea of self-reliance from being associated with autarky, right? I think that's why they do continue to use that term, is because it's not about being able to provide everything for the whole, but rather that the Philippines could provide for its people and, you know, with the surpluses, etc., right, have world trade, etc., right? At least in the initial stages, right? But rather that the Philippines does not need to be a place of cash crops and stuff like that, right? Like we can get rid of all of that, right? We no longer need to, you know, grow corn for the U.S. because they already grow enough corn, right, to make high fructose corn syrup. Like now we can grow, and so this is where something again. I don't know. I'll Miss Frizzle if you're still in chat. You know, I don't know. You didn't respond earlier, but just in case, but other people too, right? Like people that are concerned with ecology, right? This is where a lot of these terms sometimes have to be explained because you see self-reliant economy, and some people think, oh yes, communist utopia, blah blah blah. That's not what they're saying. They're saying that the Philippines should not be an unindustrialized country, right? When obviously it has the capacity to have industrial production, but also that it shouldn't be at the behest of any other country.
Of social policy. 9. Promote a national and progressive people's culture. 10. Uphold the rights of the Bangsamoro and the Cordillera peoples and other...
Yeah, so right there we go, is the Bangsamoro and the Cordillera peoples and other indigenous peoples to self-determination and democracy. This was something that, again, during that period in the 70s, because again, they were going against the Marcos government and the other, you know, against the central government. And there was a general unwillingness to join arms with non-Moro groups, that there was, again, like I said, like the catching of strays. But that when the CPP made this, again, their 12-point program, that's why now you have more in the South. You do find a lot of people that are Moro that have become part of the CPP and see the Philippines as kind of a to create a plurinational democracy for people's democracy, right? So,
for indigenous peoples to self-determination and democracy. 11. Advance the revolutionary emancipation of women in all spheres. 12. Adopt an active, independent, and peaceful foreign policy. For those familiar with the Chinese Revolution, it should be...
And note, the reason why some of the last bits and some of the bits in here sound like, wait, why doesn't it sound like the end game, so to speak, right? Why is because it's with the understanding that the Philippines is not going to suddenly be surrounded by other communist countries right away, right? And that because of that, right? I mean, obviously people can promote revolution abroad, so that's a whole different story, but rather it's with the understanding that due to the condition of imperialism, due to all of these things like foreign policy and such things require that there is no campism, for example, right? Like back in the day when there was the Soviet Union with its social imperialism and the United States with imperialism, right? The Philippines would not wish to be in either camp. And the same thing would be in this case, right? The China's social imperialism, the United States' imperialism, Russia's imperialism, the Philippines would not want to be in either one of those three camps, right? China and DPRK both funded the Philippines. Yeah, exactly. The People's Republic of China, yes, and the DPRK, yes. I have heard less about the DPRK, but I have read stuff from people that edit books that are printed by like foreign languages press, as well as other Germinal, etc. That have also written stuff about that, but I've heard much less about the DPRK. But definitely for the China has not only paid, right, funded, but also given materiel, right, like actual implements of war to fight against. And I think I wish there was a video on this. I don't know, Tempo. I don't know if you could find it and maybe put it in stream suggestions. But yeah, guns and other things, right? Like more munitions than that too. In fact, to the point where the United States got mad, right? To the point where it got mad and then said, "Oh no, wait, we want to give you the airplanes and the tanks and the blah blah blah," right? So again, so there's that. Oh gosh, now I think I forgot what I was gonna say. Anyway, it'll surely come back to me in a minute.
Be apparent that national democracy is, as mentioned earlier, in line with the new democratic strategy of Chairman Mao and the CPC. Additionally, the strategy...
Remember, it's always CPC. If you hear anyone saying CCP, they're hogs.
...of the new People's Army, the protracted People's War, is also derived from the same strategy that was used in the Chinese Revolution of developing a People's Army in the countryside to wage guerrilla warfare and surround the cities. This is in line with Chairman Mao's initial conception of PPW in semi-feudal, semi-colonial countries, like China prior to 1949 and the Philippines today. The Communist Party of the Philippines states that it upholds Marxism-Leninism-Maoism, which it asserts is the universally applicable ideology which has provided the solution to the basic problems which lay in front of them, and a groundwork for revolution and building a socialist society in the future. For example, the CPP uses the Maoist method of criticism and self-criticism in its practice, although CSON adapted the Unity Criticism Unity model of Mao to the Filipino Unity Criticism.
All countries, even those who claim to be socialist, would be very hostile to Philippines people. Yes, and that's why I'm saying, like, I mean, I think that people have seen that already with, now I remember, and this actually goes with what you're saying. The Maoist opposition in China itself, right, and how it's been, you know, held down, so to speak, and how, you know, again, China, which as much as America likes to say it's socialist, you know, we know it's not, right? Like it's unfortunate that that it is not, right, like the Soviet Union during World War II, right? Yeah, communist China, blah blah blah, right? Exactly. Like this is why an NCC stream yesterday, I like when they were when she was talking about pardon me, about how like why after the Great Depression there was this age of social democracy, right? And this goes to the person that we had. Oh yeah, I don't want to watch that video. I don't want to watch it myself. Like I personally, I don't think that I would like I think I would drag on too long just talking about it, because again, I would rather watch something like this as opposed to, you know, Johnny Harris, where I think other people can comment on it better, because I would just be like, no, like, you know, this is all not, you know, not true. But what was I gonna say? Yes, the Maoist opposition in China, right? You have that, but also the fact, of course, that what was I gonna say? Yeah, but that it would be very hostile, and this is what you see between different countries. You know, like this is why, for example, you know, you've had a war between the Maoist Party of China. No, I'm not talking about the party. I'm talking about well, that's a whole different story. I'm trying to talk about the people that want to do a rectification, right, in China now, and their oppression, right, or rather their suppression. I guess oppression works too, but their suppression, right. I just don't remember which book that is, because it's not from Foreign Languages Press. I would remember that one, but the books on the Great Debate, very, very important. Very important to read on that during the leading up to the Sino-Soviet split, for sure. Like must reads. I love that the PDFs are free if anybody needs them. Yeah.
Repudiation.
Oh, also there is a new. See, this is where people that call themselves MLMZT are very often just MLM, right? Like they might not be MLM PMs, right? Marxist, Leninist, Maoist, principally Maoists, which, you know, which I would say, and again, I've heard this being argued by many people, needs to be seen as a clear distinction. But it's not one that's useful to go into, right, for the purposes of what we're talking about. That's more an yes, exactly, yes, our right deviationist and revisionist, exactly. I sometimes hesitate to to bring that up, because again, I don't want it to be seen as though like I'm just pointing a finger and saying that, right? I want to couch it in historical evidence, right? To say something like that. Revisionism, though, is one thing that sometimes people misunderstand. But the right deviationist, I mean, that's something that I think is very hard for people that are MLM PMs can't deny, right? Like it's kind of difficult because their methods, right? The methods in which they want to kind of speak for themselves, right? So anyway.
Model. While the CPP initially referred to its ideology as Marxism, Leninism, Mao Zedong thought, it began referring to itself as Marxist, Leninist, Maoist in 1994, after the term was first officially used by the Communist Party of Peru in 1983. Guided by Marxism, Leninism, Maoism, the Filipino Revolution is the largest ongoing communist revolution in the world today. demonstrating the...
So, that is important to note. It is the largest ongoing revolution, communist revolution. Well, yeah, he technically is wrong, right? Because in India, it would technically would be the largest, wouldn't it? And also, I mean, even numbers-wise, too. It's not even... I wonder what he means here. Because is it because it's, like, the most in terms of... It's the biggest in terms of, like, the country as a whole? Because there's... Yeah, there's activity up here in the north and down here in Mindanao and Visayas. Here in Sulu, right? Like, all over the place. Yeah, I guess if you did it like that. But, no, you're right. India's is more advanced. But, interestingly enough, I was in a stream Sunday, I believe. And, I don't know. I feel that India's revolution needs to be spoken about much, much more. Because I don't know what exactly was trying to be gotten at, but this like strange, I don't know, a lot of misunderstandings, right, of what the Indian Revolution is about. I don't know. I'll bring it up later in chat, I guess, when we're watching the documentary together.
Relevance of this ideology when applied creatively by revolutionaries who are deeply rooted in and connected to the masses.
That's... oh my gosh. Hey, look, it's an accurate picture of Donald Trump for once. And it's important that he's wearing the ASEAN or, thing. But one thing I want to note is that yes, India's is much more advanced. I mean, even percentage-wise, I would say. Or, I don't know, maybe I'm wrong on that point, but definitely numbers-wise and territory-wise. Anyway, that's not the point, but, is the fact that, like, it's funny, like, white, no, the hair looks too real. That's true. But the stash, the stash is true.
Now, there are two main components of the National Democratic Revolution. The above-ground legal mass struggle led by National Democratic Mass Organizations, or NDMOs for short, and the underground illegal armed struggle led by the Underground Revolutionary...
And again, this is where I think the term illegal it's kind of important to distinguish, right? Like, this is why, for example, a lot of people will say, well, the dirty war that happened in Argentina was because there were illegal leftist guerrillas. Well, tell me when, like, under the Tsar, right? Let me know when he gave the official order to allow socialist, militias to take up arms, right? Like, I know that Paul is mentioning that to talk about how there are organizations within the Philippines that do have a connection. But again, like I said, you do not want to be caught with anything that will, as it were, be the key that locks you in the cell, right? Because it will happen. Like, it has happened. You do not want to be, on the receiving end of that kind of horror. But again, and this is why too many Western, people that think of themselves as revolutionaries always have it in their minds at some point that they can always escape, right? That they can say, oh, you know what, I was confused. Actually, I'm a hog just like everybody else. Take me back to the Imperial Core, right? And that's something that, I've also have seen occur. Not personally, at least not like face to face, but again, it is something that happens, which is why, again, the organizations that they're talking about, that he's talking about, like, that is more like the organization I was the director of, right? Because there are other organizations that do other things in Mexico that are, It can't go into detail, right? So
organizations and the People's Army. The mass struggle is waged through various forms of organizations, such as trade unions, students' organizations, religious groups, farmers' groups, fishers' unions, women's organizations, musical bands and other forms of arts groups and artists' unions, indigenous...
See, this is why I really do think that Twitch streamers should join the Independent Contractors Union. Like, it should be a program that it should be done, right? That instead of relying solely on XYZ thing, right? That streamers can will not be just kicked off the platform when they're doing things the right things, right? And so that we're paid. Because again, right now I'm not working. This is my job right now, right? Being on Twitch. And right now that I took a break, right? Because I needed one from, the discussions I was having the other week, means that I lose potential income, right? Like it just goes away. And I hate, I really dislike talking about a lot of this stuff because, I know a lot of you are already subscribed, and I want to thank, I really want to thank the Ferret King, my best pal, who always does shout outs and everything, and is such a wonderful person, and just all of you. Truly, I appreciate each and every single one of you. But right now, particularly him, because their gift subs, right, for meeting today's daily sub goal. I mean, reaching that today honestly made my whole entire day, because now, I recently had to take my littlest puppy to surgery, and, it's not easy. Do you know which guns the MP... Some of them they had taken from U.S. bases. Like the ones that were, like, being decommissioned, from what I understand. So... yeah, the Naxos use bows, but that's also because we're talking about very, very right, like the Naxos we're talking about a, what's different too, because again, the situation is very different, because a lot of the areas where the MPA has its power bases, right, so to speak, is not like a farming, right? It's not flat. It's not, so bows wouldn't work too well. But anyway, from what I understand, some of them were from like old, guns that like the bases had. Now they use FN20s and the NPA uses AKs. I mean, hey, it makes sense though. It makes sense that they would have that. Again, because like Southeast, like the South China Sea, the Straits of Malacca, right? Like that's where a lot of traffic of many things is done. And the Philippines also, going all the way up to Japan also, right? Especially because of all of the U.S. bases, right? Like when they buy new stock, right, at retail price from Raytheon, right? They will just get, just stop using them. And oftentimes they'll give them to the Filipino army, right? Like they'll sell them for a profit, right? They're not going to get their money back, because that's not the point, but they will make money off the sale, so to speak. And that's where I believe, from what I understand anyway, from my own reading of stuff that's been written about the MPA, I should note, most of it was like stuff like that, that was decommissioned or retired because the U.S. already, like at Clark Air Force Base or whatever, right? It already had, they already gave them new weapons, right? So the things that were, have you read the CP, Communist Party of India Maoist interview? No. Can you link that in Discord? Put it in the MLM channel.
Rights groups for the indigenous Lumads of the Philippines, associations of patriotic lawyers, and so on and so forth. With this mass
Also, remember, bourgeois nationalism is bad. Proletarian nationalism is different. And in the same way, like, the idea of patriotism, I think perhaps is maybe that's what they call themselves, but it's with an understanding that that these groups, right, want to be free from the imperial boot of the United States in particular.
It can be safely estimated that national democracy has a support base of several million people in the Philippines alone. One way of gauging this figure is through the support they receive in elections. Although the National Democratic Front maintains the correct policy and stance of Revolucion
Hindi Elección. Hindi means no or not in Tagalog. So revolution, not elections. Or, as it's often depicted, elections no, revolution yes, right? That, again, this is why the other day I was saying this, I actually didn't say this on stream. I meant to, though, was there are people who, again, if you read Lenin, if you read etc., like, in the context which they're speaking of, it makes sense why Lenin would say, yes, when Russia for the first time in its history has the State Duma, right, when Tsar Nicholas II, after the 1905 revolution, right, has to give a State Duma, right, grants it and gives it power, right, that then you see Lenin saying, yes, you need to use this body that now has been given power, that is no longer from absolutist autocrat, the Tsar, right, to advance, right, the needs of the people. It does not mean that it's not equal to, again, like, the elections for president in the United States. I'm not saying don't vote in them necessarily. I don't know. I personally don't want to be a person that says yes or no, right? When it comes to that, at least, again, unless you're asking for my personal opinion. Because for me, I don't, but I also live in California, so it doesn't matter if I don't, right? But the point being that, again, when you look at what Marx, Engels, Lenin are talking about when it comes to using bourgeois democracy, it's because now they have a democratic, right, something that exists that can be used to give the workers, right, more protections. So that, yes, definitely Devil EMS, for sure. If not here, definitely you can drop it in stream suggestions too. If you don't want to drop it.
That is revolution, not election. Certain independent, legal, national democratic mass organizations might pursue their own independent tactics.
Exactly. Their tactics, right? Is that what you meant to show me? The slow twerking mouse? I love it. I love it so much. I want to get a Wiggler so bad, but I mean, like, right now, again, I do not. And also, hello, Devil EMS. I just don't. I feel really bad that I can't. I mean, again, like, without your subscriptions, or also if you want to help my research, you can always go to my throne, and again, help me there, with to get the books that I need, because I cannot deal with digital books, but also because some of them, like, if the libraries are in Southern California don't have them, I mean, I can't get them. So anyway, some people use elections, right, mass organizations, as a tactic, and that is the difference between the people that say you must vote and the people that say we have an opportunity to use, bourgeois democracy in X, Y, Z way. That's the difference that a lot of people often don't here being made into a distinction, right? Like, no communist should be vote blue no matter who. Like, no. That's not the point. Because the idea of harm reduction is, one, a liberal idea. And in fact, it's actually been, I mean, there is a book, I already mentioned it before, by Jody Melamed, called Represent and Destroy, that the people that believe that actually brings about harm reduction are actually wrong. Because remember, at the end of the day, oh, that's weird. I don't know why it's, that's weird. Okay, it should work now. Oh, yeah. I see it now. I see the issue. Yeah. Oh, wait, why is it doing W's beforehand? What? Oh, gosh. I have to fix it later. That doesn't even make any sense. Why would it have the World Wide Web thing? By the way, that's what www stands for. Technically speaking, it's less syllables to say what it means, but people still say www. There we go. If you'd like to help my research, you can always go to my throne and do that directly. And again, there are many things on there. Some of the stuff is less than $10. There are also fun stuff, some fun things too. It's not all that, but again, typically, if you want to help my research directly, you can always do so by going on my throne and helping me out there. But anyway, but thank you for catching that, Devil EMS. I have to change that. I don't know why it's showing up like that.
It's important to note that in the mass legal struggle, many National Democratic Mass Organizations, or NDMOs, and progressive groups are completely independent from and unaffiliated with the
I just have to say, the depiction of Uncle Sam here is pretty accurate. Like, yes. You're so funny. But this is also why there even was an aesthetical change, right? From the prior depictions of the hammer and sickle, right? Whereas if you use the Peruvian example, which is perhaps the most striking one, because it looks, again, the sickle is meant to look like the sickle that's actually used where it's used, right? So in Peru, the sickles have a piece of wood that goes through the metal, right, and is, sutured in like that, and then keeps going, which is why it has that look of it being this really long. So if you look at them, they look more like a very curved knife, right? Which, I mean, technically that's what a sickle is, right? Technically. But the point being, I mean, that's why sickle cell anemia, for example, right? But the point being that it's supposed to look like the actual, like that was one of the things, is that like China, for example, like if you look at their Communist Party flag, like the sickle, like the handle is like a little circle. Like how has like a little knob. Like how do you like I don't know how that would work.
National Democratic Front or any of its organizations, and are thus free to pursue their own individual tactics of their own accord, even in some cases deciding to take.
That's the dangest one, where it's again it's the veneer of a red aesthetic, right? It's all about just seeming like a hammer and sickle. It's not actually about a hammer and sickle. In fact, if anything. Oh my gosh, thank you so much, Old Sick Back. Oh wow, thank you. The they them pronoun candy, but thank you so much. Oh my gosh. Like I know people might find them maybe not ridiculous, but I know some people sometimes will say, do you really need to wear your pronouns? And it's like, I hate being misgendered. I hate being misgendered so much. Because then it just, like, raises my anxiety level. Because then I know, like, if I say something... I know, they, them, yes, of course. It doesn't look like the tools. I mean, I've held the tools as, a hammer and a sickle, right? And the one that I had, the sickle that I had in Mexico was actually very short. It was like just like this. It wasn't like really round. But from what I understood was that the one from Peru is supposed to look like the ones that are used by the indigenous peoples in their when they harvest. I want to make a they them army shirt. Huh. That's interesting. Like camo and stuff. Yeah. Oh, but have it say they. Oh yeah, the they them army. Yeah, that's right. I forgot for a second.
Elections. This is important to highlight since as of 2021, the National Democratic Front has been formally declared a, quote, terrorist organisation and has been forced largely underground. Although participation in bourgeois elections can and should be debated, one thing this tactic of certain National Democratic aligned candidates standing in elections through independent NDMOs provides is a snapshot into the rough scale of the civilian support base for the National Democratic mass movement. In this year's senatorial elections, for example, the National Democratic Filipino human rights lawyer, Neri Colmenares, received a substantial 6,108,365 votes, just over 10% of the vote. Colmenares is a member of the large professedly National Democratic Coalition of mass organizations, Bagong Aliansang Makabayan. Bagong Aliansang Makabayan, founded during the Marcos dictatorship, is one of the most significant groupings of legal NDMOs, consisting of hundreds of thousands of members, many of whom work overseas through groups such as Anak Bayan. Now, when talking about any kind of connection between the above-ground, fully legal mass movement and the underground struggle, this needs to be spoken about with
This is what I was mentioning earlier. This would be something that... This is why I said, you do, like, in the US, for example, you could bring out, Capital Volume 1, or the Little Red Book of Mao. Like, I mean, most people probably won't, but, and I use these examples because they seem the most innocuous, right? Like, oh, it's just a book, right, so to speak. But that's not the case. Like, again, as soon as they can prove, or seem to prove, right, give enough reasonable suspicion, the police does try to go after those people. So that's why I said, like, if the people that visit the Philippines, right, the people that like, this is not something you talk about openly, right, because it's an ongoing struggle, right? Same thing in India. Like, that's why I felt that when I was in that stream, it was like they were saying to me what I know the state media, right, like the bourgeois media, is saying about the Naxals. I'm not saying that they're, whatever. I'm just saying that their grievance was the same grievance as the bourgeois government, the capitalist government, right? And so that made me hesitate to, one, I didn't want to engage because, again, this isn't something that you can, in a few succinct chats, right, change someone's mind on. But rather, it's something that would have to be placed in a historical context, at least in my opinion, so that then you can begin to discuss it, right? Like, sorry, I misgender sometimes. It's not oh yeah, like, I mean, I understand, like, it happens all, I mean, I do it all the time as well. Everybody, misgenders on accident. It's that, you apologize, or, say, whatever, make, immediately recognize the correct pronouns, right? That's what's important. Here, let me turn this up just a little bit.
Extreme caution. Legal National Democratic activists with no affiliation to the CPP, NPA, NDF are constantly accused by the Filipino government, now under the control of Ferdinand Marcos' son, of being so-called terrorists. This process, known as red tagging, has been used to silence political
Oh, it's funny. I was gonna. That's a term I couldn't remember. Red tagging. Is that this is the reason why if you were to go to this is why when I was teaching in where Jose Maria Sison went his alma mater, I didn't bring him up. Like the people that I knew that knew of him and were willing, like his picture's not up, right? And it's not like, oh, he's a he's a valued alum, right? He's one of our notable alums, right? That they try to to encourage people to attend the University of the Philippines. No, you have to be very careful bringing him up, bringing up anything along those lines, and that was why the article, the paper that I delivered about the Philippines could not happen in the Philippines. Like, because if I mentioned anything that made any connections that could be read the wrong way, or rather would be read the wrong way, you could be red tagged. And again, this afflicts people, particularly if they're like dual citizens, right? Or if you're Filipino, where again this is more likely to happen. Whereas if you're white, it'll be different, but you still will get reprimanded in some way. But again, because I am BIPOC, and even in the Philippines, people thought I was Filipino. That also made me very aware of the fact that red tagging, I mean, it's serious. I'll put it like that. It's very serious. It's not something you want to get caught up in. Like, I think that's how you know that someone like Vosh, etc., right? These people that are supposedly leftist that kind of are only online, is like, you can tell that they don't actually need to do revolutionary work, because if they think that this, like what I'm doing right now, is praxis, which it's not, right? This is more discussion, elaboration, education, but it's not, like, this wouldn't be me giving you the education that you necessarily would need to, right, exactly. But I mean, I'm sure that you, Tempu, as well as I, would never go into detail of what that is, right? Like, I will talk about it in stuff that's past tense, that doesn't, the organization doesn't exist anymore. Never saying the name of the organization, for example, but etc., right? Like, because again, red tagging is something that's done all over the world, and in the United States, it's different. But people do know that this happens. It's just not necessarily in this way, right? To silence political dissent. So again, this is why I can talk about it, but not on the exactly. You may want to update your throne after stream. Some of the fun items were unnavigable. Oh, okay. Yeah, like some of those were, I put them on there when I first got a throne account. So yeah, I'll definitely look at that afterwards. So I might have to take some off, and so I'll just change them for something else.
Sent in the Philippines for decades.
So anyway, because red tagging is not something that actually threatens Vosh or threatens, XYZ person. I don't even know why I'm using him as an example, because he's not a leftist at all. Like, there is no doubt in my mind that he's not a leftist. But again, that the situation is very different when people feel that they can engage in these discussions openly, especially when it's something that, being BIPOC and being marginalized in many other ways, also means that the repercussions that you will face, or that I will face, will always be much worse than anything, a cis white person will have to suffer through, right? So,
and reached a new deadly height under the recently concluded presidency of the fascist.
So this is when I was in the Philippines during the fascistic Rodrigo Duterte. So again, my research that I did at this time in the Philippines, I had to keep it under wraps. I could not talk about it with anyone around me, because it included something that could have me red tagged. And again, because I'm not a white American, America doesn't care as much about, as we've seen, in other instances. So again, and because again, who knows what would have happened? But I knew that I could not. Pretty weird. Joma had peace talks with Duterte in exile. I mean, I would say that Joma after a while. I mean, I would say that after being away from the Philippines, I mean, I don't want to be one of those people that says because he lived in the Netherlands, and because people have shown that his life was not this lush lavish life, but again, because he was in the Netherlands, right, living in exile, I mean, I think to me that's a IDK what he was trying, because he obviously wasn't. Yeah, exactly. I think that the book that he published, or the book that he wrote early on, is important, but him as a again, just how there shouldn't be book worship, there shouldn't be great man worship, right, or great figure worship, because that's what leads to something. That never leads down any good roads anyway. So, but I think what Duterte thought was that the CPP and the MPA would at least would heed what he said, right? That he at least had influence, but it showed that it wasn't the case, right? If anything, and again, because of Duterte, I couldn't. Joma was good early on, and when he wrote the Principles of Marxism-Leninism, or on Marxism-Leninism in Our Revolution, that's one thing. But again, it's not about who says Donbass is People's War. I mean, someone who does not. I don't know. Yeah, that's it. I know it's campism, and it's not good. It's not good for any Marxist, let alone Marxist, Leninist, Maoist. But regardless, or at least someone who purports to be one, right? Because again, as it says, you shall know them by their fruits. Yeah, the CPP is a whole different story. But I knew that if I would have delivered that paper in the Philippines, the CPP couldn't have done anything to help me, right? And I wouldn't have asked them to, because it was critical of things, and so that's why I was I don't mind it, if it means, because I know that it's again, this is why if you're doing praxis, regardless of whether you're doing propaganda or whether you're doing education, or whether you're doing whatever role you play in the party that you, or the organization you are part of, when a comprador bourgeoisie government is when other people who know the CPP and everything are saying are very cognizant of red baiting, or red tagging, then that the situation is really that bad. It's the same thing in Peru, for example. And I know, Sarah, you had mentioned this earlier, right? That for you, being Peruvian, right? That is sometimes when you think of particularly El Sendero Luminoso, right, the image that comes to mind, or the images that come to your mind, are not exactly the most positive ones, right? I'll put it like that. And so, There is another documentary that Tempu, were you the one that put it in the channel? I want to say it was you, but I could be wrong.
Rodrigo Duterte, who, similarly to Marcos before him, has now put one of his children in power as a way of continuing his political legacy, with his daughter Sarah Duterte now serving as
the documentary that's about the Communist Party of Peru.
Vice president. To avoid accidentally red-tagging innocent activists, it's crucial to always bear in mind the completely independent nature of the legal mass movement and the NDMOs.
So again, certain things like this symbol, you can't really see it, but it's like a wavy, like capital I, right? That comes from one of the indigenous alphabets or writing systems that existed that exists in the Philippines. Right, or the reference to 1964 when this particular organization or this flag, right, like these people here actually are actually, you know, the fact that they're protesting in openly in this way is, again, like, it takes a lot of courage to do something like this in this situation, in a country that is so deeply imperialized by the United States, where, you know, you had dictator, democracy, dictator. You know the show MASH? Yeah.
In any case, through rough estimation, it's more than likely that the broad stretches of the mass movement of the revolution operates within a support base of at least several million people. The Filipino People's War is ultimately the key part of the National Democratic Revolution, as it offers armed resistance against the bureaucratic state and land-grabbing imperialist corporations from abroad. Following the strategy of protracted People's War, the New People's Army is in what's called the strategic defensive stage of the revolution. This form of protracted People's War is fought by forming guerrilla fronts in the countryside.
They're probably just drills. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if they were doing it with the U.S., to be quite honest. Because the U.S. is now apparently doing that with, like, the entire Pacific. Like any country that's in the Pacific, right? Because it just wants to. They look so old. They're so old that they have someone with like with the shovel, you know, putting in coal into the fire. Oh my gosh.
People in the local area and engage with enemy forces in sabotage and hit-and-run warfare. Similar tactics were employed, for example, by the.
Yeah. So when they talk about sabotage, here's an interesting fact about that word. It actually describes a very particular action that took place in France, and it's actually an anti-capitalist one. And it's interesting because we now live in an age of AI and, you know, humans being replaced by technology, which is, again, something that was going to happen. Capitalism was going to do this from the start. Only under socialism, however, right? Like, I remember there was a really good picture. And it was a tweet, technically. And it said how Karl Marx would feel knowing that instead of knowing that a machine is doing the painting and the, you know, like all of the things that he said, oh, man would, you know, again, using the in 19th century language, that humans would finally be able to, you know, focus on art and to do literary criticism, blah, 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 right? And that humans are instead being put to more and worse working conditions, right? While it's the AI that's getting to paint and to have lengthy conversations about novels and blah blah blah, right? It's like that's actually horror right there. Like, that shows you that, like, capital does not give a fuck about, you know, the working classes in any way. Like, for, like, if, like, that image to me is, like, the violence in American Psycho is tame compared to the violence that is being portrayed in that simple dichotomy right there. Because what it means. Right? Because it means so much more of that horrific violence that, say, would characterize that film. It's just ongoing, constantly, and only getting faster and faster and worse